Some crimes are violent, some are emotional, but this one should not exist at all. There was no forced entry, no signs of struggle, no noise reported by neighbors, and yet someone disappeared. The apartment door was locked from the inside. The windows were closed. The lights were still on. A phone rested quietly on the table, fully charged. No missed calls. A wallet sat untouched. Cash inside. Cards exactly where they should be. Even the coffee was still warm. Investigators would later say this was impossible, but psychology doesn't care about what should be possible, because not all crimes are committed with hands. Some are committed with ideas. This is not a story about violence. It's a story about influence. And once you understand it, you may never hear another conversation the same way again. The victim was ordinary. No enemies. No criminal record. No signs of depression. Friends described the person as stable, reliable, normal. And that was the first mistake. Because psychology tells us something deeply uncomfortable. The most vulnerable minds don't look broken. They look functional. They wake up on time. They go to work. They answer messages. They smile when required. But inside, they are searching for certainty. The human brain hates uncertainty, craves clarity, direction, confidence. And when the mind finds a voice that sounds certain enough, it follows, not because it is weak, but because it is human. This disappearance wasn't sudden. It was gradual. Conversation here, a suggestion there. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming, just ideas, presented calmly, logically. Psychologists call this cognitive offloading. When a person slowly allows someone else to think on their behalf. First, it feels like relief. Someone understands. Someone has answers. Someone sounds sure. And certainty is addictive. The manipulator never threatens. They don't need to. They simplify. They remove complexity. They reduce doubt. They say things like, "This makes sense, doesn't it?" Or, "Anyone logical would agree." And slowly, decision-making shifts, not forcefully, voluntarily. The victim still believed they were in control. That's the most dangerous stage, because influence feels like freedom, right up until it isn't. Days before the disappearance, nothing seemed wrong. Messages were sent. Plans were made. Life appeared normal. But psychology leaves patterns, not fingerprints. And the pattern here was subtle. Shorter replies, fewer opinions, less resistance. The mind had stopped questioning. That's when the final suggestion arrived. Not as an order, not as a command, but as a solution. Clean break, a fresh start, a logical next step. The victim wasn't forced to leave. They were convinced. This is what makes the case so disturbing. No threats, no coercion, no visible manipulation, just belief. Belief is more powerful than fear. Fear makes people hesitate. Belief makes people move. Investigators searched for evidence. They found none, because psychology doesn't leave bruises. It leaves obedience. The manipulator didn't benefit financially. There was no ransom, no trail, because the goal wasn't money. It was control. Control over narrative. Control over thought. control over choice, and once achieved, the manipulator disappeared too. Not physically, but strategically. They stepped back, because true manipulators never stay to watch the outcome. They move on. This case confused professionals, because it challenged a comforting assumption that adults cannot be controlled without force. But history disagrees. So does psychology. The human mind seeks certainty more than truth, and anyone who provides certainty at the right moment can rewrite reality. This wasn't an isolated case. Similar patterns exist everywhere. Cults, toxic relationships, extremist ideologies, different settings, same mechanism, a confident voice, a simplified worldview, promise of clarity, and a listener ready to stop thinking. The scariest part isn't that this works. The scariest part is how easily it works, because the mind doesn't recognize manipulation when it feels understood. By the time doubt appears, the decision has already been made. The victim was never found, not because they couldn't be, but because they didn't want to be. And that truth makes people uncomfortable, because it means safety isn't just physical, it's psychological. This story isn't about crime. It's about awareness, about recognizing when confidence replaces curiosity, when certainty replaces questioning, when thinking becomes outsourced, because the most dangerous influence doesn't sound dangerous at all. It sounds calm, reasonable, certain. And once you understand that, you don't just hear words anymore, you hear intention. But there is something even more disturbing about this case. The victim wasn't unintelligent. They weren't naive. They weren't desperate. They were informed. They read books. They followed news. They believed they were rational. And that's exactly why this worked. Because intelligence does not protect you from influence. In fact, it often makes you more confident that you can't be influenced. Psychologists call this the illusion of immunity, the belief that awareness alone is protection. But awareness without vigilance is useless. The manipulator understood this. They never rushed. They never demanded trust. They allowed the victim to arrive at conclusions on their own, or at least to believe they did. This is known as guided reasoning. You don't tell someone what to think. You walk beside them until they reach the destination you already chose. Every step feels voluntary. That's why the victim never resisted. Resistance requires conflict, and there was none. Only agreement, only affirmation, only a calm voice saying, "Yes, exactly." Over time, the victim stopped checking reality against other perspectives. Why would they? Everything already made sense. This is when isolation begins. Not physical isolation, psychological isolation. Friends sound confusing. Family sounds emotional. Opposing views feel irrational. The manipulator becomes the clearest voice in the room, not because they are loud, but because everyone else sounds uncertain. The human brain trusts confidence more than accuracy. Studies have proven this. People follow leaders who sound sure, even when they are wrong. Certainty feels safe. Doubt feels dangerous. And once doubt is framed as a threat, the mind avoids it. The victim didn't walk away from life. They walked toward clarity, or what felt like clarity. That's the tragedy. The final decision wasn't dramatic. There was no emotional breakdown, no tears, no goodbye letter, just a plan. A simple one. Leave quietly, disconnect cleanly, start over. Not because they were running, but because they believed. They were finally thinking clearly. The manipulator didn't suggest disappearance. They suggested freedom. And freedom is a powerful word. Carries no alarm bells, no warnings. Who argues with freedom? That's why this case unsettled investigators. There was no crime scene, because there was no crime in the traditional sense, only a psychological chain of events that led to a physical absence, and the law struggles with what it cannot see. But psychology sees it clearly. This pattern repeats in different forms: high-control relationships, cult recruitment, radical belief systems, different language, same structure. First, reduce complexity, then offer certainty, then isolate doubt. Finally, redefine freedom. At no point does it feel dangerous. That's why it works. The mind doesn't resist when it believes it has chosen. This case was closed, without answers, but it left behind a warning. Not about strangers, not about criminals, about conversations, about certainty, about how easily the human mind can be guided when it wants relief more than truth, because the most dangerous influence doesn't look like control. It looks like understanding. And once you recognize that, you stop asking, who would do this? And you start asking something far more important. How would I know if it was happening to me?